and welcome to the Beat by Beat podcast with Armani Exchange. I'm Emerald, I'm a DJ, presenter and broadcaster. And each episode, I'll be welcoming a different musical guest to talk to them about their talent and their journey through their musical career.
I remember sort of trying to fantasize and figure out how people actually produce this music, how it was made. I sort of imagined people in lab coats, and these big NASA computers, which wasn't far from the truth. I was in this big sort of open office space with a bunch of art directors and graphic designers. It wasn't really anyone else around making music, but I hadn't even met Axel and Petter yet. I contacted Axel and Petter and asked them if they wanted to share this space with me. We were like, yeah, we're not sure how many more years there's actually going to be vinyl culture, how much longer this type of sound that we're really fascinated by right now is going to be something that other people are interested in. So let's just do it.
Armani Exchange's values have reflected the electronic music space since the brand was born. Evoking the idea of connection and unity, Exchange is about the coming together of different people, united by a shared passion for the dance floor. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you my second guest, the wonderful Cornel Kovacs. Hi Cornel, how are you?
Hi, very good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you very much. Where are you right now?
I'm in my studio in Stockholm, in Sweden, in Studio Barnhus, as it's called. So I share it with Axel Boman and Pedro Dollar. We've been here for the last 11 years. And yeah, this is where I go every day to work on things, make music, listen to music, hang out.
Nice. What have you been up to this morning so far?
Not much, to be honest. Setting up this interview, cleaning up some mess here in the studio to make it look nice, trying on my new Armani Exchange clothes, that sort of thing. I've been up since 6 a.m., so pretty early for me.
Nice. Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you, and it's nice to meet you, finally.
Yeah, likewise.
Let's take it back to the beginning of your career. Well, actually, just the beginning of Cornel Kovacs, of you and your story. Can you tell us a little bit about the time when you first discovered electronic music?
Yeah, I have a pretty particular memory of that. I guess a lot of people in history discovered electronic music through Kraftwerk. My mom was a bit of a Kraftwerk fan when she was young. And I in particular remember the Computer World album that she had on cassette tape. My parents are Hungarians. They both lived in Budapest and then they moved here in the 80s and I was born a few years later, so I was born in Stockholm. And I guess she brought that Kraftwerk cassette tape with her from Hungary. We didn't have a lot of records at home or anything. I grew up with my mom mostly. And she didn't have lots of records, but the few records she had were really great. And my favorite was the Kraftwerk tape for sure. So I would just hear that a lot growing up. And obviously hugely influential album and hugely influential group, Kraftwerk, really ahead of their time. So yeah, that was just something I listened to. That was my first exposure to proper electronic music, I'd say.
Do you have a particular moment or memory from when you were a kid hearing Kraftwerk or hearing something that your mum would play you that you really remember that visually, or do you remember an exact moment at all?
Yeah, I do have this memory of my mum vacuuming our apartment and playing Kraftwerk at the same time, and some sort of weird sensation of these sounds from the vacuum cleaner and the music mixing. Apart from that, I don't know, a few years later I got really into drum and bass. That was my sort of first proper musical obsession of my own. This was in the mid-90s, so a really interesting time for that particular genre. And I just remember going to the library in Stockholm, because at the library you could also borrow CDs, records. So I remember finally, scoring a couple of proper drum and bass compilation CDs sort of, and bringing them home and putting them on my mom's stereo. And yeah, it just blew my little mind away. I mean, I think that happened a few times. That was sort of a routine I had of borrowing records and sometimes buying them as well. But, they were expensive. I didn't have a lot of money because I was 10 or something. I still don't have a lot of money. But I remember sort of trying to fantasize and figure out how people actually produce this music, how it was made. I was already playing the piano quite a bit, and I was singing in choirs and getting some sort of musical education. And I knew how to do that. I understood how a piano works and how a drum set works and that sort of thing. I sort of imagined like almost like a laboratory setting, like people in like lab coats, and these big like NASA computers on taking up entire walls, like that sort of thing, which wasn't far from the truth back then. I mean, it did take quite a lot of expensive equipment to produce like proper electronic music back then.
I really like the idea of the sounds of the vacuum mixing with the Kraftwerk sounds. Yeah. I feel like that's something that maybe needs to be explored a bit further.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely interesting.
And how do you think growing up in Stockholm impacted the music that you were making at the time, or the music that you make now? What was it like growing up in Stockholm? What were you hearing? What were you listening to over that period?
I mean, I think the main thing about being involved in electronic music and club music and that sort of thing in Stockholm is it's very much an outsider perspective somehow. If you grew up in London or you grew up in Berlin or any of these sort of hotspots for club culture and electronic music, dance music, then I mean, you're really in the middle of it all, aren't you? Of course, there's like many upsides to that. You can have easy access to music and information and like-minded people, and that can really help you develop and grow whatever you're interested in doing. Or if you're a fan, then that obviously gives you access to a lot of things. Stockholm is pretty far from that. I mean, there's a strong tradition of music being made in Sweden. Like we've had good studios and record labels and quite a lot of export of music to the rest of the world for since the 60s, 70s. There was a rave scene in the 90s that I was exposed to, indirectly or later on a bit directly as well. But I would say the main thing about growing up in Sweden was developing this outside perspective on club culture and dance music, and sort of you'd have to imagine what a club was like. Also because I was so young, so the few clubs that were around in Stockholm I wasn't let into, obviously. But yeah, just you'd have to imagine things. Sometimes you might get the wrong idea, but that might create something new. If you can go down to like, I don't know, the Blue Note or Plastic People or Fabric or Berghain or whatever every weekend and get like this sort of instant connection with the scene and what's going on, then that's going to influence you quite a lot, for better or worse, I think. And that was very much the case, because this was sort of in pre-internet times as well. Not really, but like mid-90s, there wasn't obviously nearly as much information around. Then, yeah, you kind of have to like imagine these things for yourself. Like, how does a club work? What does it sound like when a DJ plays? What does a sound system, like a proper sound system, actually sound like? And you might get some things wrong, but you might also sort of accidentally create some new things out of that.
Well, they say necessity is the mother of invention, don't they? So I guess if something's not there, you've got to be resourceful and create it for yourself, which can create something really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we fast forward a little bit from those times, well, maybe a little bit, depending on when this happened for you, but when was the first time you ever played out, when you DJ'd out? Do you remember it?
Well, it depends if we're talking about like a proper club, or at least like a semi-proper club, or if we want to go back even earlier. I knew I wanted to be a DJ from a very early age. I was fascinated by it since I was sort of, I guess, 10, 11, something like that. At that time, I still couldn't wrap my head around how you'd actually produce this music, but I could figure out what a DJ did, sort of. I understood that. And my mom did have a turntable, so I could play vinyl records. I sort of learned about like beat matching and understood how that worked. So my mom had this sort of combined stereo set, which had a CD player and a cassette deck and also turntable. So if I played a CD on the CD player, I could at the same time just with my hands, because the stereo wouldn't turn on the turntable part and the CD part at once. But if I played a CD through the speakers with my finger, I could put a needle down on a record on a turntable and start just moving the record forward with my finger, and that way I could make two records sort of match up in BPM. So that was something I did quite a lot. My dad had moved back to Hungary at the time, and he was working for a radio station, which was a pirate radio station at the time. It was great. They had lots of music programming and also quite a lot of political talk shows, sort of that sort of thing. It's a legal radio station these days, so much like Rinse FM sort of has that same history. I used to go to Budapest in the summers, and one summer I got to tag along my dad to the radio station, and there a DJ called DJ Arab, big up DJ Arab, he kind of showed me the ropes. Went back to Stockholm, I just started buying as many records or shoplifting as many records as I could. I did apply to like a DJ course at this youth center called Fryshuset here in Stockholm, so I learned a bit there. So my first ever gig was at this youth cafe in Stockholm called Lava, where they'd have sort of open decks on Sunday afternoons, I think. So yeah, that was my first actual gig. I still have the flyer, but it wasn't like paid or anything, and you know, there weren't people dancing or that sort of thing. It was just like people hanging out on a Sunday afternoon. And then I got a few sort of gigs here and there, just off the back of like hanging around these older DJ types, and you know, I was kind of like a weird little mascot for them or something, I guess. They must, you know, it was probably pretty hilarious, the whole situation. And then, I don't know, when I was like 15, 16 or something for a few years, I mean, I definitely kept my interest in music. This was also the time of like the MP3 boom, so I spent a lot of time just researching, I guess, just like downloading copious amounts of music and, you know, listening to it all. But then when I was like 17, I started going out a bit with friends in Stockholm. I had a fake ID. I think my first proper gig at a club was at this kind of indie rock club in Stockholm called Metropolis, which was really popular at the time.
Every city in the world has a club called Metropolis.
Yeah, probably.
Totally.
That's good. But yeah, this was sort of the, if you recall, like Errol Alkan's Night Trash at the end, that sort of, that era where like indie rock started mixing with like house and techno and like electro clash. You could play that sort of music at Metropolis, like you could get away with playing quite a bit of dance music. So I got to know one of the guys who was a resident DJ there at the time, called Sebastian. El Barbaro del Ritmo was his DJ name. And yeah, we just became friends. We were like chatting about music online and things, and he invited me to play with him. And that was my first club gig.
Wicked. And how did it go?
Yeah, I think it went really well, actually, that one. Yeah, I have fond memories from that for sure.
Good memory then, solid one. You've written for a blog before. You've written for a few magazines. Is writing about music still important to you? Will it always be important to you? How does it feel for you writing about music?
Well, at one point, like in my early 20s, or kind of when I was 19 maybe, towards the end of high school, I did imagine a career in writing, specifically about music, I guess. I had my own MP3 blog, which I think was sort of Sweden's first MP3 blog. That was a kind of new and popular thing at the time, that people would post MP3s on their blogs and, you know, anyone could download them. And sometimes, you know, some blogs might actually write something interesting about the tracks in question, sometimes not, but I was definitely into it. Also because of the writing aspect, I thought it was interesting. I think I just, you know, I loved writing. I still do, but I definitely don't do it professionally anymore. It was one of the ways that I could sort of imagine a career that had something to do with music. I wasn't producing anything at the time. I was DJing, but I figured, you know, you could combine that with writing about music quite well and doing radio also and things like that. It was just a way of being close to music and being involved with music somehow. I did quit writing about music as soon as I started getting a bit more involved in producing music and releasing music, because yeah, I do believe in the separation of the critical and creative classes. I don't think you should do both.
Why do you think you shouldn't do both?
Because it's bad for criticism, mostly. Maybe a little bit bad for creativity as well. But I think, I mean, I just don't think it's sort of proper journalistic practice to, you know, sort of criticize the same kind of thing that you're also producing, if that makes sense. Like, a critic has to be free. A critic has to be free and like daring and able to just write something down, like completely slag a record off if necessary, if that's what they think. I think if you're sort of involved in the scene that you're also criticizing or covering, you're probably gonna have strong incentives to not, like, you know, create too much trouble, or, you know, to not make enemies, sort of. I just don't think it's healthy for criticism. I think criticism is really important, and like music journalism is important and has a big part to play in developing music.
I guess one of them holds the other one back in both cases, doesn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about your Sting Red Bull Music Academy that you did back in 2008? Because this led to the formation of something amazing, which was Studio Barnes, with Axel Bowman and Petter Nordqvist.
Yeah, it's great being part of that trio. It means everything to me. I was involved with RBMA, with Red Bull Music Academy for many years. But I wouldn't say that Red Bull Music Academy had anything at all to do with the formation of Studio Barnes, though. So my first experience with RBMA was in 2008. So I went to Barcelona that year together with, I think it's like 30 people each time or something like that. They all locked us up in this like amazing, it was a remade textile factory that time, I think, in Barcelona, which is, all sorts of studio equipment and really good lectures and just really nice people from all over the world. Axel and Petter I met in 2010. We were sort of acquaintances from like Stockholm nightlife and, the music scene here. But we weren't like close friends or anything. We all had separate studios, and neither of us was really happy with our current setups. I was in this big sort of open office space with a bunch of like art directors and graphic designers, and I had to sort of keep noise levels down all the time. A friend of mine who ran this t-shirt company, they told me that they had this sort of this basement that they used as like warehouse for their t-shirts basically, and a small office in downtown Stockholm. And that it was mostly empty and that I could sit there and make music if I wanted to. It seemed big enough for 3 people, though that would soon prove to be somewhat of a misconception. It was really like claustrophobic for the first couple of years. I contacted Axel and Petter. They knew each other a bit from before as well, and asked them if they wanted to share this space with me.
That's where you are right now, is it?
That's where I am right now, yeah. This is the old Studio Barnhus, which is now all mine. And Axel and Petter have since got their own rooms, which are next doors. So we've been really lucky with this place, and it's been the center of our operations for the last 11 years. It's a great place for making music. It's a great social place as well.
It must have sentimental value being there for all that time as well.
It does, yeah. It scares me to think that we might someday have to move away. Though why would we? I don't know, it's ours. We're gonna be here forever. I think, yeah, we're gonna be here for the rest of our lives, for sure. And then they're gonna make a museum out of it. It will always be Studio Barnhus.
So how did Studio Barnhus, how was it born? Other than sharing this space together with the two of them, when did that inception of Studio Barnhus form?
I mean, for me, Studio Barnhus is many things, but I guess, so the first thing was a studio. It's on Barnhus Street, so that's where the name comes from. But what it means is orphanage, basically, so it's Orphanage Street. The name kind of just happened organically, and the DJ trio happened, I guess, just because, we were all DJing quite a bit in Stockholm at the time, in clubs and bars, and we just started crashing each other's gigs, basically, and playing together for fun. And then somehow the name Studio Barnhus got attached to that as well. Petter obviously came from a background of releasing some really big records on labels like Border Community and, touring the world at a quite young age, together with like James Holden and Nathan Fake and that crew. Axel had been making music for quite a few years and was really sort of hitting it off at the time. I was really just starting out with the whole producing thing. I was learning a lot from Axel and Petter and just experimenting in the studio and being really frustrated that my stuff wasn't sounding nearly as good as theirs. I think after about a year of that, we were just like, all right, let's try to put out one record, like the Studio Barnhus record. This one thing which is only going to contain music that was produced here in the studio. But we had no real plans to start an actual record label. We had no idea how that worked. We were just sort of eager to find out, how does that actually work? Like pressing a record and getting it out there somehow. Somehow during that process, as we learned how to do it, we were like, all right, we could do this more times, this could be like a regular thing. So the first idea for Studio Barnhus was that it would be an outlet strictly for the music that we produced here. Soon after we released that first record, we got a demo, or just really, it wasn't really, I don't even think they thought about it as a demo. It was just some friends of ours from Gothenburg, which is the second largest city in Sweden. They sent us some new tracks that they've been working on. We started playing those tunes out a lot in our DJ sets. We really loved them, and we really loved the guys. And then we were like, yeah, we could do this with our own tracks, so we can just as easily do it with theirs, probably. And we tried that, and that was the second Barnhus release. I remember feeling, even back then at 2010, that we were sort of late to the party with vinyl and, putting out records and that whole thing. We were like, yeah, we're not sure how many more years there's actually going to be vinyl culture, or how much longer this type of sound that we're really fascinated by right now is going to be something that other people are interested in. So let's just do it. Let's put out all this beautiful music that our friends are making and that we're making. And I think it was by the 5th, 6th release that we started thinking about it more as a label,
Amazing. And it all started in where you're sitting right now today. Let's talk about the pause that we're going through right now. Obviously, there have been a lot of negative effects. The nightlife industry has been impacted, possibly the worst out of every industry, but there have been some positives that have come from this pause. How has it been for you in terms of positives? What have you got out of having all this time on your hands?
I mean, back in March a year ago, I have to say that I was secretly like super relieved that I didn't have to tour for what I imagined would be like a couple of weeks or months or something. Because I just came off sort of a pretty intense like 3 or 4 year period where I'd basically been touring every weekend. I really enjoyed it, and you know, I'm super eager to get back into it now, obviously. Like being a DJ since I was, you know, like 12, 13, and just like really almost like desperately clinging on to any gig or any opportunity that I could get. So I had this sort of ethos of like accepting every gig, playing as much as I could all the time, and you know, hopefully becoming a better DJ because of it as well. I really do think that you need to play a lot in like a lot of different situations and for different crowds in order to kind of evolve as a DJ. But definitely, yeah, by like March 2020, I was a bit burnt out or something. I kind of still loved every gig. It was just, you know, I mean, there are downsides to that sort of life. Obviously, all the travel is really exciting, and you know, I wasn't complaining much about it at the time. But if anything, it was the social aspect. Like, I'm in my 30s now, and it's getting harder to, you know, pull the gang together on a Tuesday night or something, because, you know, people have proper jobs and families and whatnot. And all my weekends were always dedicated to airports and nightclubs in different cities. So, you know, I'd miss out on every dinner party, and, you know, I'd miss out on weddings and, you know, that sort of thing. So, like, when the pandemic hit or when the pause started, I was really grateful for that, for having more time for friends and family back here in Stockholm. Also, I have to say, like, it's been a drastically different experience here in Stockholm than it has in most cities. I don't know enough about the whole thing to say if the Swedish model is a successful one or not. I don't think it's up to DJs to talk about that, really. But I mean, for example, this summer we were able to do, and like this was completely legal and sanctioned by the government. We were able to do this sort of outdoors club in Stockholm. There's been gigs, there's been like small things here and there, especially over summer.
I mean, I've loved that the most important thing to you was kind of getting your life and your social aspect back, because for me, that was the most important thing, and it was such a blessing to have a summer where I could just kind of relax. And obviously there are limitations in who you can see and what you can do, but it was nice to just not be constantly in an airport or just constantly exhausted.
What this has led to is perhaps a more like a realization within myself that I need to have more balance with these things in life.
Yeah, I mean, let's get us back to playing to crowds and not laptops.
Yes, please.
All right, Cornel, you have brought 2 tracks with you today for us.
Yeah.
One of them is your own track. Another one is a tune that means a lot to you. Let's start with your own track. Firstly, tell us what it is.
It's Purple Skies, which is the first track on my latest album. Like the majority of the album, or the tracks on that album, it's a collaboration with Rebecca and Fiona, a Swedish sort of dance pop duo who are really great friends of mine. It was a really interesting process for me working with all these people on it. Everyone really brought like their own things to the table, and it turned into something that I'm quite happy with. It's pretty different from most of the music I've released. It's more of a sort of R&B or pop tune, but I think you can hear some of my musical universe in it as well.
I think it's beautiful. I really love it. What was the production process like when you were creating it?
I actually finished the whole album, but an instrumental version of it before Rebecca and Fiona got involved at all. I was actually away from the studio quite a lot. I mean, I did go here to hang out, and I had my record collection here, so I'd go here before gigs and, you know, pick out tunes and you know, going for meetings or whatever, but I wasn't really making music here. I also really like switching switching up where I work on music. Like I still like working from home a lot. I like to rent studios in other places, or borrow friends' studios, things like that. It's sort of helpful for my process somehow. And I was for some time sharing a studio with Fiona from Rebecca and Fiona. She's got a really nice small studio here in Stockholm. Like sharing that studio had us talking a bit about collaborating or somehow on something. I remember really sort of liking the instrumental version of Purple Skies as well, but I just kept on listening to the album, or this like prototype version of the album, and I just thought something was missing. And then those two things kind of merged, and they ended up writing lyrics and vocals and performing vocals. And Purple Skies was the first one that we worked on. It was really fun because it was super collaborative. Like Niklas, the jazz musician, was also involved in writing the vocals, and we're actually both singing on it as well, myself and Niklas, though you can hardly hear it. It's like mixed really low in the background. A lot of kind of back and forth, a lot of different versions, Rebecca get a new idea for a line and add it, and we were all like moving around. I was touring a lot at the time, so I was sort of working on it all over the place, and then I was in the studio with Matt in Cologne in Germany for some time, working on it there, and we worked in like 3 different studios here in Stockholm. It's actually a super complicated track in that sense, which is usually a bad thing somehow, but for this track's purposes, it worked out nicely, I think.
It sounds like a really complex process, and there are a lot of people who had a lot of input into this tune. How did you know when it was ready? Because it sounds like it went through so many different processes.
I never know when things are ready. It's ready when people start getting upset that it's not been released, or when someone tells me it's ready, or when I get stressed because I haven't had a release out in some time or something like that. I don't know.
So who do you call on to listen to tunes when you want to put something out?
I mean, obviously Axel and Petter are like really close confidants in that sense. Though it's also sometimes we're quite shut out from each other's processes. I think it's this thing where we're so close and we see each other all the time, and we kind of have quite similar tastes, and I think we know already. Like I know if Petter is gonna like something, I know if Axel is gonna like something or not. And they probably feel the same, vice versa. So, but like Matt Carmill, whom I mentioned, mix engineer, studio technician, I mean, he's also like a really important creative collaborator or partner for me. Like he'll give me lots of feedback, and I really trust his ears and his mind. But yeah, how do you know when something is finished? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just have to put it out at some point because that's what you're supposed to do. Once you're doing changes that just make the track different, and not definitely better, because you can always make things different, but if I've been working on it for a week or something and it's just sitting there in my computer and I get this feeling that it's not really getting better, it's just getting different, that's probably when you should quit working on it and just throw it out there.
Do you remember playing it out for the first time?
Don't think I ever have played it out, actually. It's not really a party track, is it? I might have played it at some festivals as a sort of either like first or last track, but yeah, no, I don't remember, because I don't really think I have played it out. The tracks on Stockholm Marathon, I haven't really played out much in my DJ sets at all. Tracks from my first album or like from my EPs, I've definitely played out a lot, and I always try to play something of mine in every set at least.
It feels like it's quite a personal project for you, and maybe isn't something that you want to play out to clubs because it's a personal thing for you.
Yeah, I mean, I try to make all my records personal, especially albums. What sort of ignited it was this pretty particular like moment in my life when I broke up with my girlfriend at the time. I moved back to my old apartment in Stockholm where I hadn't lived for a few years. I started seeing a lot of friends that I hadn't seen as much in the years leading up to that, and I also started working more like close with Niklas. We've done music together since forever, but this was definitely more of a like focused process for the two of us. For me, it's about Stockholm and some of the particular aspects of living in and growing up in this city.
So let's talk about the second track that you've brought for us today, which is a tune that means a lot to you. Tell us what it is, first of all.
Well, it's Goldie, Inner City Life, isn't it? Or, well, actually Timeless, so the really long first track. It just completely captured me when I heard it the first time. So I was 10 or 11 when I first heard it, and that was definitely one of those cases where the sounds and like combination of sounds just completely blew my mind. And I spent years trying to understand even just the, tiny aspect of how it was made. It's a funny thing, because like, so rare that something is so avant-garde and at the same time so popular. I think that's a rare occurrence in music history. It does happen every now and then, and I think it was really the case with Goldie's debut album. I mean, I think already at the time, like, Goldie was this big sort of media figure and, a celebrity basically, and not one of these sort of anonymous like studio heads that were mostly making this type of music back then. So it really brought it out to a sort of larger audience, including like 10-year-old me in Sweden, obviously. But at the same time, I mean, it just still sounds so futuristic, so well-made, so soulful and beautiful. And it has this sort of, I mean, it's a really long track, isn't it? It's like, like 15, 20 minutes.
Hence the name, Timeless.
It's actually like 3 tracks in one, isn't it? So it's Inner City Life, which is part 1, and then it's Pressure, and then it's Jah, those 3 tracks. And they flow together really beautifully.
Do you feel like it's influenced your sound at all since hearing it when you were a 10-year-old?
Yeah, I think so. I think drum and bass and jungle music from that era particularly has definitely influenced my sound in quite conscious ways, but also unconscious. I mean, I do sample a lot of old drum and bass and jungle. I mean, most of the time you won't be able to hear what I've sampled. It might be like the smallest little millisecond of a sound, or just a one-shot drum from something like, completely taken out of context. But just like knowing that there's this like small bit of some recording that I really love kind of, I don't know, helps me push forward in the process somehow, or makes me like what I'm working on more. I use a lot of like classic jungle breakbeats in my music. I think I have quite like melodic bass lines a lot of the times, and those are perhaps pretty direct influences of drum and bass and jungle, I guess. It's in my musical DNA, because that's what I was exposed to at that time when you're really forming your musical universe. Also, it was like, I'm still so like fascinated and curious about the relationship between Goldie and Rob Playford, who was his studio engineer, and who some people might say, was a big creative force behind those tracks as well. If you play Timeless on a good system now, I actually did that a few years ago, where I hadn't listened to it for a long time, and then I was in this in the best studio that I've ever been in, especially, at least if you're talking about sort of acoustics. And me and Matt were there working on something, and we started toying with like playing our favorite music, stuff that you've heard hundreds, if not thousands of times before, where you like really think every little detail in the track. And then you play it in this kind of room where there's just pristine, completely neutral sound. And that's when you suddenly, hear these new things open up in your favorite music. So I did that with Goldie Timeless, and it was one of the like strongest, music listening experiences of my life. Even though, this was just a few years ago, and I know those 21 minutes by heart, it was still, that really reminded me what an amazing like work of production and engineering and creativity that is.
Well, excellent choice.
Well, thank you, yeah.
Picked a UK boy as well, so nice one for that.
For sure, yeah.
It's been such a pleasure chatting to you, Cornel. Honestly, it's been great, and I hope that I can come to Stockholm soon and see you. Yeah, we'll have to sort it out as soon as we can, and I hope I'll be coming to the UK quite a bit this summer, June 21. For sure. As soon as those borders open again, it's happening. Thank you very much for joining me for the second episode of the Beat by Beat podcast with Armani Exchange. See you for the next one.